It's crazy just how fast technology evolves, right? Just look at your own lifetime. Think back to when you were a little kid. What was around, what you could play with, what would existed, and how different that is from now. And that's just, for some of you, maybe 30 odd years, maybe less. Now take a moment, sit down with your grandparents or your great-grandparents and try to see the world through their eyes. How much has changed. It's insane. It astounds me that we're walking around with things that used to be fiction, that used to exist in someone's head, in someone's imagination, and now they're real. They're things we use every day. Some of them we even take for granted. So on today's episode, I have the dynamic duo back in the nest. I have Robert Avery, aka Bobby A, and I have the Haitian wanderer, Joseph Mark. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about a variety of technological subjects. We're going to try to wrap our thick heads around some of these inventions that are beginning to be discussed. We'll be talking about Elon Musk's NeuroNet. We'll be talking about AI, artificial intelligence. We'll take a little delve into immortality. But it's going to be interesting because these are things that are and might be real. Things that will evolve in our lifetime and will change the way we exist, the way we interface with the world. So I want to give one technical note. For some reason, the audio quality for this conversation is slightly off. I promise we'll do our best to remedy the problem. But without any further ado, I want to give you our next conversation. Hope you enjoy. Right, for this episode, I wanted to talk about a couple topics, right? So we wanted to talk about Elon Musk's his neural network and this implant technology that he is developing as of now. Right. We also wanted to talk about immortality, how to extend life, and we were also going to discuss, this AI, this human AI symbiosis, this next possible evolution of the human species, this merger with technology. And that incorporates like the singularity and all that jazz. I call that, that's the tech religion of the day. So I'm curious what you guys are thinking about on this topic. I started thinking about because I listened to the Elon Musk talk recently with Joe Rogan. I was listening to someone else and I just got like a little fired up, a little scared, a little intrigued. And I'm curious what you guys are feeling on this subject. So why don't we start with what topic do you want to start with of the few that I listed?
So let's kick it off with the Elon Musk Joe Rogan podcast because I'm glad you mentioned that because I did re-listen to it after you proposed that topic, and the things he was saying about the government and how Elon Musk told the U.S. government that something like this would happen, and they didn't listen to him, and they kind of try to silence them. What do you think about that?
All right, so
Yeah,
so for those who haven't listened to this, let's kind of paint
yeah,
the
good.
picture. Let's lay down a foundation,
Mhm.
right? So what spurred me along on having this talk was, yes, I watched recently Elon Musk come on the Joe Rogan show and they talked about a variety of topics, right? One topic was AI, which is kind of an inevitable thing, right? When you have Elon Musk in the room, eventually you're going to be talking about artificial intelligence, right? So, yeah, I mean, I know Elon Musk has gone on record many times kind of talking about the pros and cons and maybe the dangers of artificial intelligence. And yeah, in that particular episode, he of all the topics they discussed, that was one. So let's start. That's a good place to start. Let's start with the AI because that's a Pandora's box in and of itself. So what do you guys think about just artificial intelligence? None of us, for those who are listening, none of us are experts in computer science, in the technical arena, but we have opinions like everyone else.
So, what are you guys' thoughts on artificial intelligence as you know it? And whoever wants to rock with that one, it's all you. I think Rob, I think you got some thought.
So excellent question, Chris. Yeah. So the thing about artificial intelligence, and I think you and I have had this conversation as well. Um, every time the thing that strikes me the most is every time you punch anything. So I'm on my computer, right? We're podcasting. And anytime you punch anything into a computer, it's learning about us. And that's kind of, it's a little scary to me, that we're just allowing ourselves to let the AI learn about us. And then eventually we're going to get to Terminator 2. That's the joke part of it. We're going to get to, it's Judgment Day. So, Joe, I'm going to throw it to you. What do you think, as someone, all three of us worked at a technology store? Um, what do you think about the fact that every time we speak to each other, or every time we punch anything into any computer, it starts learning about us?
I kind of feel like that was the next step in how we actually um, use technology. It's a weird it's a weird situation where it's a great way for us to learn how to solve very difficult problems in such a short time. So we can use AI to try to figure out very complex math situations, or try to, let's say in this case, try to figure out a way to overcome a pandemic. It's the applications for it can be very, very useful. It's it's just that the platfalls of using AI can also be very detrimental as well, where AI can be used for nefarious reasons to try to topple other governments, to try to topple other corporations. It, there's a good side and a bad side to it. The question is whether or not the pros outweigh the cons, and I honestly have no clue.
Okay, yeah. So one thing I think that's the AI conversation is very interesting because it's so convoluted, right? So you guys both mentioned, kind of examples, like test cases of what we would call AI, right? So you have like, I heard a guy explain this once as you have AI with a capital A and you have AI with a lowercase a, right? You have like AI that is, for example, YouTube, right? YouTube involves and uses algorithms in some form, let's call it artificial intelligence. It can kind of predict your likes and your dislikes and what might make you outraged, what won't. It knows, it's able to learn and predict, right? But that's a world apart from Terminator AI, right? You're talking in that case, that's capital AI. That is, um, you know, supreme intelligence AI, conscious being that is synthetically, is not biological, is synthetic, is a synthetic consciousness. That's Westworld AI.
Correct.
So
Sentient robotics. Exactly right.
excellent, yeah, sentient. That perfect way to say it. So I think that's the one thing. So let's maybe parse that out because that I think creates a lot of the confusion whenever I listen to anyone talk about AI because it's kind of a catch-all phrase. So I agree, right? There's definitely tons of benefits to a machine that can begin to learn, and we're going to use the word learn broadly, right? You can give it data and it can figure out, find a cure for a disease. Perfect example. So in that case, like you're saying, Joe, yeah, I mean, that version of AI we have, like it's kind of in the works right now. So that's interesting. Now, Joe, my question to you would be, what do you think with those two distinctions, like low level AI, like what we're describing, something that can learn and is able to predict, and we use it for social media and I think they use it in the finance world. That's starting to be incorporated. Now, what do you think with that compared to like supreme intelligence, like a machine that can think for itself is collective and has an IQ that's maybe 200,000 times what the smartest human being can have. So what do you think about that distinction?
I don't think that there's in terms of like a threat.
I mean, a threat, or I guess let's broaden it and just what would a world be like if that existed? You might say it's good, or you might say it's bad. So let's look at it as let's not even judge it. Just like if that was to come to be in our lifetime, right? Let's say by 65, so 30 years in the future, there was what existed on the planet was a synthetic organism that was smarter than a human being could ever conceivably be and existed on the planet. What would that world look like? And you can take it could be good in your perspective, and let's say Rob, he might say it's completely horrible. So what is your opinion on that?
I think the world that we would live in now would be very very similar to the world that would be in place if we did have fully developed AI. I just think that a lot of the processes that we have now would be much more streamlined. Um, Definitely in terms of being able to analyze and break down and come up with solutions. Uh, it would be much more of a streamlined version of getting those things done. So let's say we wanted to find out how to get from here to Mars. Instead of waiting 10 years to get that done, we can get that done in maybe a few months. It's just I feel like the rapid rate of technology and how we actually adapt would be much faster. But I also don't see it being any drastically different from the kind of society that we live in now.
All right, that's an interesting comment, Joe. Like, you don't think it would be different. So, I mean, the good thing about the three of us, and I'm interested to see if Drew can chime in on this, is we grew up in kind of the perfect time. So, prior to us, like, we were all born in the 80s, right? So, this was pre-iPhone, pre-social media, and all this, and pre-Elon Musk, pre-Tesla. So we kind of see both sides of it, and that's why I believe our perspective is a little more valuable. I don't mean to be arrogant when I say that, but we're a little more valuable considering that we've seen both worlds. We've lived in both worlds. So, my question to you, Joe, is which way would you prefer? Do you, to your point, do you want to live in this kind of gray area? Or as you know me, I kind of side with previous times. So I'm interested to see what you think.
I feel like we already live in a gray area though. It's just that there's so many examples of that gray area being lived in. It's just like the next step. It's as long as there are certain guardrails put into place to make sure that it's not used and abused by people with nefarious purposes, then I'm fine with it. It's just a matter of making sure that those guardrails are followed by everyone involved.
Okay, interesting. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have a special guest in the room, and at some point, you will hear this magical man's opinions. I introduced him in the introduction, but right now he's just gathering himself. But in this present moment, I'm gonna keep chiming in. Joe, I am extremely surprised that you don't believe that anything different would happen. I don't see how that. I guess it's very interesting that as us as friends, I have a completely different perspective on that. Like I'm just trying to imagine a being that exists on the planet that is so far superior to intelligence than you are. Like we're not talking. I guess in the example, maybe I didn't bring it up correctly, but I'm not talking about a machine. I'm talking about a sentient being that is aware of itself and has motivations, right? And who knows what those motivations are? Could be good, could be bad. I'm not passing a moral judgment on that entity, but just imagine, like, to look at an ant next time you're out and about, right, or a cockroach, right? It cannot fathom us at all. We, as human beings, to some degree, can fathom it and even predict it, right? That's a whole division of science is on just insect study. Now imagine a creature that is even the difference in knowledge and difference in intelligence is even further than that, right? It's even further ahead of us as we are to, let's say, an ant, right? My takeaway or my view on this is that, like, I think that you would see the world change 100%. I don't even know if we can fathom yet what that world would look like if that existed. It doesn't exist yet, right? This is still we're talking kind of science fiction at this point. But there are people on the planet, and multiple people on the planet, many that are actively trying to create this thing. And obviously they're moving ever closer to it because AI used to be, think about it, what we use today was science fiction, right? Artificial intelligence was science fiction. Like, people were writing about this in the 1940s, and now some version of it exists, and there are people trying to get to that, that next step, which is like a sentient machine. So I don't know. My thought would be that I don't even think you could predict what the world would look like. Like, how could a government control something like that? It's like the government trying to control, like, Mr. Manhattan, right? You're talking about an entity that is just is so much further superior to you that, like, all right, government can really control that. They could try, but could you, like, really? No, it's something that would be able to predict you, would be able to. I don't know. I'm not even looking at it in a negative. It could be like a benevolent creature, but it also could be a devil. I don't, you know what I mean? Like, and based on that, if it's a benevolent creature, all those people that want utopia, well, maybe that's the gateway to utopia. But all those who are like really fearful of AI, hey, they could be absolutely correct. You don't know because it's a powerful entity. I mean, that's my thought. Yeah.
I like what you said there. So my question to you is, I think you and I both share the kind of it's almost diabolical, is I don't trust it, is what I'm trying to say. I don't trust AI. I don't think that this is good for the world. Everything, we're giving our privacy away for it just to have gadgets and this computer, and so I don't know, man. Like, I think you kind of touched on it a little bit. Is it a good thing? Could it be good? Yes. What if these artificial, you said, machines are good? They do good things, but they can also do bad things. They're like humans. We're the same thing. So I don't know. It's more of a trust issue that I have with it. But go ahead, Joe.
I think, to piggyback on what you said, it's very much like a human in terms of the way of thinking. And that's where I kind of come in. I just don't see it as much of a threat. Humans are very flawed, yes, but I just don't see the the level of fear that I don't see it being any dramatically different from when the nuclear bomb was invented or when the internet was pretty much laid to the regular public's feet in terms of being able to use that. It's just a matter of, and I'm pretty sure there are guardrails set in place for a worst case scenario. But I don't see how our way of living is going to be dramatically uh, changed, because I kind of feel like our way of life is very much it's kind of set in place. It to me, all AI is really designed to do is to speed it forward by several decades, so maybe and probably at the end of our lifetimes, even faster than that.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not, and to go to, I want to kind of comment on on what both of you said. So Rob, I'm not necessarily like, I'm kind of excited, honestly. When I like listen to them talk about this, it's like an interesting thing to me. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily fearful, but I'm very like I'm fascinated because to me, I don't agree with you, Joe. I don't think, with at least how I conceptualize it, like if you're, we already have it, like this artificial intelligence, lowercase a, right? Like that already exists, and it's not really, well, I guess that's up for debate. Has that changed the way we live? In many ways, it has, right? Because the algorithms, the AI tends to show you things, as far as, let's say, YouTube, that's going to piss you off. So who knows? Like it's still too new to even say. Like no research has been done to show if that's affected people in a negative way. I think it's going to be proven. Yeah, it has. So in that case, no, I think even with what we're dealing with now, like to some degree, it's obviously affecting something, or people wouldn't use it. There will be no benefit for these companies to employ it. But with, as far as like society, we're kind of, I that's just a difference of philosophy. I don't think society is like, let's say society. I'm going to put that in quotes because I don't even really know completely what society is. But like, I don't know. I don't think it is kind of like set in stone, and it's on it's on this railroad on tracks that you can't push it off of. I mean, to use your example of the invention of nuclear warfare, to us, you might say it hasn't changed anything, but think about it. The invention of a nuclear bomb destroyed a whole country, right? Japan, I don't think they said, oh, yeah, this didn't really change our way of life. It literally decimated their civilization, so much so that America had to jump in, I think almost out of guilt, and help rebuild them. Right now, they're okay, but like if you were someone who was of that era, literally fire fell from the sky like the earth had never seen before, next to maybe our distant ancestors who saw comets falling from the outer space. Like, no, like the people who witnessed that, I can't imagine. They might be, even the first thought that went in their mind might have been like, oh no, this is the end of the world. And for many of them, it was. So now I think in hindsight, it's like, oh, it's not really affecting us. Well, it's because no one's using them, right? But that invention changed the game, right? I mean, part of the Cold War kind of was, all right, we got to accumulate weapons. And even now, today, right, there's still countries that are trying to fight to get nuclear weapons because it does change how you're perceived on the global landscape, right? I mean, if you don't have nuclear weapons, kind of like you could be a nuisance, but you're not going to win, right? If you push someone too hard and they use a nuclear weapon on you and you can't retaliate, you're screwed. So yeah, I don't know, Joe. What do you have to say to that?
Well, that's kind of my whole point. When the U.S. used the atom bomb to end World War II, it was just it was used as a means to an end. And I kind of feel like AI, to me personally, is not something that I fear. It's man's use of AI is something that I would fear. And to me, that's something that is already prevalent in our way of life. Every piece of technology that we've ever developed can be used against us, and I just personally don't see how that can really be AI in and of itself can be feared. To me, it's man's use of AI that should be feared.
Okay, so I have Drew. Drew is going to chime in with some words of wisdom.
First, finally let me out of my room, keeping me in there. So I think what I have to say is that many, obviously, different interpretations. Everything from Black Mirror, Runner, varying degrees of like dystopian, ones like more AI. I think it's. Does anyone remember that movie? Probably trailer. If if you can. But I think that's Chris. He's a servant of his family. Live with them, like the grandchildren. Those are my thoughts.
I don't know. We might have had. I don't know if you heard all of that, but Drew was stating that he agrees with you pretty much, Joe. He's saying that there's many uses for artificial intelligence. It can go in a variety of different ways, but he also believes that at some point he believes it could take the shape of the Robin Williams movie, Millennium Man, where you have this artificial intelligence who is a servant for humanity. But remember with that movie, Drew, if you recall, he was not happy with being a servant. He wanted to seek individuality. And in that pursuit of individuality, he could have chosen the dark side or the light. And in this case, our Robin Williams robot chose the light and became a genuine, member of society
Exactly. Bingo.
and helped people.
That's exactly right. Bingo. So it's tough because I like what everyone's saying, but it's a really hard thing to think about because it gives you so many benefits, but it also takes away a lot of things. So that's why this topic in and of itself is very interesting because yeah, Chris, you get let's just say the bionic man. He could be good, he could be bad, but it's will he become bad is the fascinating part to me. Is when the genesis of all of this is is Elon Musk going to make good things, or is he going to make things that appear good and then turn bad? That's where I come in. Go ahead, Joe.
So that was the question that I had. In terms of the research that I did for this topic, Elon Musk was very much against AI from what I saw, but then he decided to create the neural network to try to combat it. And I find that I find that kind of puzzling. In order to beat AI, you have to join it. That kind of idea is just weird to me. I wonder why he actually decided to go in that route.
Yeah, very interesting because you're right. Because with Elon Musk, at first he was one of, I would say, the biggest voices out there, kind of preaching the dangers or the potential dangers of this technology. And now, yeah, like when you listen to that Joe Rogan podcast, that was the first time I had heard about the Neuralink, and that as an invention seems freaking amazing, so interesting. So this is kind of a good point to kind of transition, right? So we have, you have all these interesting technologies that are partly theoretical and are in the works. People are trying to develop. So you have the Neuralink, right? And I'm curious, Joe, since you did some research, could you kind of define to a layperson, what is the Neuralink? Just the gist of it.
So from the research that I did, it's pretty much uh, a piece of filament that's put into the certain portions of the brain to capture electric impulses. Where from there, the chip that's placed behind your ear can learn all of the they can learn the things that need to be like, oh man, it's hard to describe. It's a way to kind of link up with your brain waves and actually line up with your way of thinking, where you can actually it can help people who have ALS or Parkinson's try to link up with the computer network and actually read out certain paragraphs, or to use a robotic arm that they normally wouldn't be able to use and actually go about the different functions of their life. It's just a way to be able to utilize certain features of everyday life much faster. You could even do like very banal things like instead of you grabbing a remote and changing a channel, you can actually just think it and it'll do it on its own. It's very the applications for the neural network. It can vary from very useful things to very basic things.
Yeah, so that was my generally speaking, yeah, that's how I understood it. I think that's how he explained it, right? As of now, it's a piece of technology that would go into your head, and then it gets literally implanted like wires into different parts of your brain, and it can, then it's like its features and its uses kind of there's a variety of them. What do you think, Joe, about the idea? Because he even mentioned it was that like someone who was blind, for example, and I know your sister, that this is something that she deals with that technology theoretically would be able to give sight back to someone who's blind or give hearing back to someone who is deaf or like you said ALS or these different these different diseases that deteriorate the brain as you age could theoretically be undone. What do you think about that, Joe?
From what I was told by my sister, a variation of that technology already exists, where there's a chip that's already implanted in the in the eye, where it can, if you have a piece of glasses, you can actually then read out what's in in the glasses, and then from there see and dictate what you want to then be uh, be read out or be dictated from there. So this is just like the next step or the next evolution to that. It's I'm just kind of, it still just baffles me why someone who is so very anti AI would then decide to just go and say, okay, if you can't beat them, join them.
Yeah, that's a good question, Joe. Honestly, I don't know the answer, but I think you're bringing up a very significant topic. Is and I'm interested to hear what both of you think about this. Uh, but if you have someone that's supremely intelligent and they have significant wealth or um, influence is the word. Um, why do you think they normally like almost lean on the side of, hey, um, I'm going to take advantage of this? It's almost as if they're trying to take advantage of the situation, and that's what's it's a little disturbing actually. But I'm not to say that Elon Musk is doing that, but the fact that he has the power to actually do that is very interesting to me. And then and I think him and Joe Rogan, when they were talking, they did touch on that a little bit. That that it's more of an influential thing. The fact that they have the opportunity to do that.
That's a great point, Rob. I didn't really think about that, and now that you brought it up, that it's something where that kind of power shouldn't be in usually one person's hand, or in this case, I guess a small group that's developing this technology. When I was doing some of the research on this as well, there was some thought of people who were like his one of his arch nemesis or his rival, Jeff Bezos. He is trying to defeat death, and I guess this is another way of trying to do that, where you can offload your consciousness into a form of AI and continue to live from there. But then the idea of being human would be very, very different than what it is now. Yeah, I it's that's the part where I really haven't thought of, and that's actually a part where there definitely are a lot of dangers going into that aspect.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that was something he definitely talked about in that recording about being able to save states. I think that's how he framed it was you would be able to literally back up your I don't want to say your consciousness, but see with this, I'm glad you brought this up, Joe, and this is going to kind of lead into at some point when we talk about immortality. But again, yeah, it brings up the question of like, what is who you like? What are you, right? Is it your, from his perspective, it's like the brain is just electrical impulses, and if you can mimic those impulses, then you are in fact mimicking that person. And he said, I recall him saying, he was like, you would be a little different, but you would still be you. And it's just an interesting question because it's like, well, what does that mean? What is you? Like I'm reading Carl Jung today, and he's talking about the unconscious and the collective unconscious and all of these things, right? These abstract ideas. All right, well, if they're true, then that means that you're kind of more than just these electrical impulses, because there's these different aspects of your psyche, and some are hidden from you, some are you're consciously aware of. There's a lot there. So that's like, to me, is kind of an interesting thing. It's like, well, what does that mean? And you're right, it would change very much what we consider humanity, because you'd have, let's say, Robert Avery, who's been alive for all of these years, and he would be him, and he had to have his brain. And then you might have, let's say, just use Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos, who's 200, now maybe he's no longer in a human form, or he's been able to record his consciousness, save state, and upload it into a new body or whatever. It's like, well, is he still Jeff Bezos, or should we call him should he be renamed? He's not Jeff Bezos, but he's not 100% Jeff Bezos. He's something kind of a hybrid, something in between. And that's an interesting thing, because to what you said, Joe, it's right. I don't trust governments, so I don't trust the government to have these technologies. I don't necessarily want them the one controlling it, because let's be honest, they're doing all kinds of nefarious shit all the time. And do you really want them being the one with their finger on the pulse of everything? I don't want that. But with the way it is now, a lot of this stuff is just being invented, right? I mean, you're using Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk because they're celebrities, right? You know them. But there's lots of people developing this technology in places you don't even know, in labs that are just not sexy, or they're not well-known people, but they might be at the cutting edge of this technology. So it's like you got people in garages developing this stuff. It's not really controlled or regulated, and its impact on humanity, like how we see ourselves, is really is on the line. And it could be good, it could be bad. It's kind of up to debate.
That's incredibly well said, Chris. Holy fuck, that was well said. But two things I want to say. One, you're right. What happens if we can just and they do it in Westworld, where your consciousness, like literally your existence is put into a ball, and they just implant it in you. So, Chris Corvo, Joseph Mark, Robert Avery, I can take myself and implant it into a robot, and it's just wild to think about. But yes, like your entire existence can be placed in a little ball. But to your point, what does it say about you where, like we talked about, you have control? How do you behave where you have power and control? And that's the interesting thing. And Joseph, I'm going to ask you this. What do you think about people that they're in control and they have this ball, and how do they behave is speaks to your character more than anything else, in my opinion.
To me, it's all about your upbringing. I don't think people, for the most part, I don't think people are they are born with a innate way of thinking where, okay, I don't like a certain group of people, or I don't like society, I don't like mankind the way that it is. It's usually learned process or a way of living where mankind kind of skews into either a positive way of looking at the world or a negative way. And if AI is to be like the next step of human evolution, I don't see it being any different from that. It's just a way of learning. And this is why I don't see it being this kind of end all, this kind of negative um, kind of way of life of human life being over as we know it. I just feel like it's like a next step, a next evolution. And if the guardrails are set in place, if a certain body of people put in certain rules so that titans of industry don't use and abuse it, which I feel that could happen, then I think we should be able to, because AI was happening already. I feel like AI was already being developed since the 60s or definitely 70s. This was going to happen, so it's just a matter of time. And if there's a certain body that can actually make sure that it doesn't go off the rails, then I think that we should kind of not embrace it, but not be terribly afraid of it.
Okay, so I have a question for you, Joe, or whoever. It doesn't matter. So let's look at it this way. Let's take Westworld let's use Westworld as an example. And I'm gonna focus on a very specific aspect of Westworld. Right? In Westworld, robots became sentient. It was not the intended consequence. It was like something that happens in nature, right? It had happened spontaneously. They don't understand it. It just happened. So that I'm curious, what do you believe that there is a parallel to that? Because what I'm hearing from you, Joe, is um, we need guardrails put in place to focus and protect the use of this technology, which I agree with you. And like you kind of said, right? AI lowercase a exists. We already use it. So I mean, there should be guardrails put in or laws at the very least just for the current technology. But I guess also where I begin to divert from maybe some of your views is, you know, the unexpected consequence. And also, how can you're, I don't want to use the word slavery, but in a way, what I'm hearing is like, if we can control this technology and bend it to our will, then the benefits will be positive. But imagine, right? It's like an ant enslaving a human being and bending it to its will. Doesn't work, right? So if you were able to create a supreme intelligence, I think it's kind of presumptuous to believe that you can then control it. But it's like saying you can control God if God were to exist. No, you can't. Like, you're talking about the invention of a superior being potentially, and then hoping that you can control it and bend it to your will. I think, to me, and this is not a judgment on what you're saying. I'm just, to anyone who said it's kind of like, I don't know, like, that's kind of naive, and you can see it play out. I mean, fiction is a perfect example to see how ideas can kind of play out in a variety of different situations. Like, it's kind of presumptuous to think that you can control it. I mean, there are slave revolts throughout history, right? Like, you cannot control things, especially you're talking about now something that's far more intelligent than you, to think that you can like make sure that you wield it and that it is wielded. So I agree in the sense that, like, people are usually at fault for things, right? How you use a gun can be both positive and potentially negative, right? You can use a hammer to nail, hammer and a nail. You can use a hammer to kill someone, right? So in one case, like, I agree with that, but on the other hand, it's like to assume that artificial intelligence, like, when I mean like super intelligence, thinks like we think, has motivations like we have motivations, perceives the world and the things in it the way we perceive the world. is like not. I think that's just not. I don't know if that's. It could be that way, but it could very easily be something very different. It'd be like if you met an alien in another planet. To assume that you could like relate to it is, I don't think is logical.
All right, hold on. The thing about that, Chris, I'm gonna have to disagree with you on that because it's literally the Anthony Hopkins slash Robert Ford situation in Westworld, which you brought up. If I create something, I should have kind of a say in what's happening. And that's kind of what I was alluding to. Because, yeah, yes, it's a problem, but if Robert Ford created it, created this park, he's kind of responsible for what's happening here. You understand what I'm saying? So if you're the creator, it doesn't matter if it's God or if it's the saints or the angels. If you created it, you have some air of responsibility. Is what I'm saying. And then I'll throw it to Joe. What do you think?
In terms of creation, uh, I think if the people that were developing this sentient AI, if they were smart, I think they would create certain guardrails. Like, let's say there's a there's a lifespan on a particular piece of AI, or there's a piece of programming that would kind of block off AI from doing one thing. These are things that the people that are developing this AI have to think about. Now, whether or not the supreme intelligence finds a way to work around, that's a different story. But I kind of feel like there, in order to create something like this, every scenario has to be thought of. And I think that the people that are trying to push this technology, they're thinking of it and they're trying to find out ways of uh, trying to circumvent that. Now, in regards to kind of, I just feel with AI, I don't see this benevolent kind of system just taking over and creating havoc. I kind of, it to me, just like in Westworld, I haven't really watched that show all that much, but from what I do know, the the robots that did take over and kind of created mayhem, they were kind of they were put in a place in a place mentally to rise up against I guess their programmers or their uh their owners and try to take over from there. It to me it's just a matter of how we treat AI and how we actually kind of steer um their line of thinking. Is it more of just kind of touching every little facet of everyday life, or is it really more just kind of setting applications for um, getting rid of human surgeons and creating robotic surgeons, or um, trying to overcome very tough mathematical situations, or overcome very tough um, science situations. To me, those are the kind of pathways that I think that we're kind of trying to, or the Bezoses and the Musks of the world that are trying to push this in. And for me personally, I just don't see how the everyday life of a human on this planet can really be negatively impacted by AI unless a certain group of body, like a government, or a titan of industry decides, okay, I'm just going to use this to actually go and kind of use it for my own purpose.
Joe, I really liked that's really really well said. And there was one point I really liked that you said that it's also how we I don't know the exact word you use, but like to how we raise it, right? It's like how you teach it, and that teaching potentially could reflect what it becomes, just like a child. So that's really interesting. And I was listening to one guy was talking about AI, and he actually stated this exact thing. He was like, it's one theory is that advanced AI, like kind of what we're talking about, the big AI, would be maybe raised off of or evolve out of like this lower level AI. And then he said something which was really funny. He's like, "So what do we use AI for?" And then he listed on his hand like a bunch of things, and it's like they're all negative. He's like, "We use it for gambling. We use it for advertising. We use it for making money. Governments use it for surveillance, etc." And he's like, "So if that is the foundational, if that is the let's call it the adolescence, the baby to teenager, that this is the foundation that future AIs will grow out of, well, then it's kind of a scary thing, like, because just like a human being, right? It's a lot of times what you amount to as an adult, there's some origin in your childhood, and if your childhood is rough, not to say it will always happen that way, but there's a chance that will bleed over into your adult life. I want to kind of switch gears and go back to something we briefly talked about, which is like the Neuralink, but more specifically, just the idea of, and me and Rob, I think, talked about this in one other episode, but like that is kind of a starting point in this human computer combination, right? Yeah, that's like cyborgs, and to some degree that already exists, right? People have fake hips, they have pacemakers. There's and I'm going to butcher the name, but the corporeal implants for those who have lost their hearing, and there's already, that's been going on for a long time. But something like this Neuralink would be a next step in that pursuit. What do you guys think about how that would change life? Because the one thing, like, Joe, I like a lot of what you said. I agree, and a lot of times you are like the angel on my shoulder, right? You're the more positive of the two of us. But I have to say again, I disagree in the sense that, like, we're gonna be that'll be a very different world, right? Like, if you have people walking around who can communicate, let's say, without speaking, who can understand a variety of different things, who can think faster, right? All of these different benefits that could eventually happen with the Neuralink. They're not existing right now. That's a different landscape. I don't know what society would look like. I'm not saying it's going to be bad. It just would be very different. It might be, to like what Drew said, it may be very much like a Blade Runner world at that point. You're talking about a really, we'll be interacting in a very different way than we're used to.
So I totally agree. I think we will be interacting in a very different way. But I think in regards to that, it's really more of a speed up of automation. At least for me, the way I think about it, I feel like AI and automation will kind of be combined, and then the way that humans kind of live out their life and kind of think about what they should really do with their lives will be dramatically different. Like, what is this idea that humans kind of get their meaning from the work that they do might be very much changed. I think that the idea that humans and kind of their existence on the planet will be very much changed as well. And there are going to be some hard questions that we have to ask if AI is truly kind of prevalent in our society in terms of how we actually go about living our lives when there's not really much for us to do if AI is taking over all of these little things that we do.
Well said, Joe. And I'm gonna give you a joke right now. It's what you just said is perfect because it made me think of the scene in The Matrix where what's his name? Agent Smith. Agent Smith is trying to explain the purpose of everything to Neo. And that's the thing, Joe. Like, what is our purpose as a living, functional being, or as, like you said, the AI where I can create the purpose for someone? and that's one I want to. So I'm going to throw it back to you, Joe. Uh, can you create that type of purpose for someone or something, not one?
Yeah, I think that's going to be very hard to do, especially in the future where our planet is going to be more inhabited, probably 9 billion people, maybe 10 billion people. To create purpose for that many people, that's going to be near impossible. I just think that if AI was super prevalent, you're gonna have millions, possibly billions of people that aren't going to know what to do with themselves. And to me, when we started having this
Yep.
conversation during this podcast, so that's the kind of thing that
Yeah.
I started thinking about, and that part is scary to me. Like, you're gonna have kind of people aimlessly living their life, and it's just something that not many people have thought about.
Yeah, well said. That's really, really, really well said. Because you're right. Like, what would the world be like? Because people do get value out of you get value out of work. I mean, with what's going on in the world now, people have not been working. They've had a lot of time on their hands, and I think for a lot of people, it's been to their detriment. Like, unless there's someone who likes to learn or they can push themselves, but a lot of people are like, it's not good, right? What is the saying? Idle hands are the devil's playground, right? That old kind of proverb. Um, it'll be very interesting, right? Like if you had millions of people unemployed, and it's interesting. There's a TV show on Amazon Prime called Expanse, and it's like science fiction. And not to talk about the plot too much, but one aspect of it is it's in a world, right, where Earth, the majority of people live off of like welfare because there's just not work for them to do, right? The Everything is mechanized and automated, so there's just not a lot that people there. You don't need a lot of people to do things, right? So people are just like getting handouts all the time, and someone might think that's great, but also you have all these people that have no value in their life, right? They don't feel any worth because yeah, their needs are met, but they're not doing anything. Like they're not getting any value with their labor, with their life. There's nothing to expend their energy on. So that's a thought I hadn't thought about. I'm glad you brought that up, Joe.
Yeah, well done, Chris, too. Um, but so I'm actually gonna ask Chris a question now. And Joey, you can chime in if you want. What do you think? Okay, so let's step back and do a little macro research. What do you think is the purpose of AI?
I think that's in the eye of the beholder. I don't think you could find a definite answer to that one. I mean, there's probably someone out there trying to build like a conscious woman, a artificial intelligence. You know what I mean? Like the sky's the limit as far as what its uses could be. I mean, you have people that probably have very nefarious reasons, and you have people that have very positive reasons. Um, yeah, I mean, think about nuclear technology. You can use it to make a bomb, or you can make a nuclear reactor. So it can be used in a productive way, and it can be used in a very destructive way. I don't know if there's a definite. You can also, before I know Joe, you got something to say. I think it's also just human beings' desire to create and to keep pushing forward. And I guess that may be, some of the people who have been raising the red flag and warning. I think that a lot of times their argument. It's like human beings like to discover, and in the world that we live in, you're not going to go discover a new continent. You discover things in the technological realm. So I just think you have those who are thinking it's you what there's a saying to this, but it's like, you know inventors and scientists create, philosophers explain and try to understand. I'm butchering it, but let's say like that general idea, right? I don't know if everyone who's involved in like deep learning and the pursuit of artificial intelligence is really taking a lot of time to think about the ramifications and how this, like the domino effect. I think a lot of them are just like, this is, this is the cutting edge. I want to learn. I want to discover. I want to create something, and this is just that next thing for them to create. If artificial intelligence, if it existed already, there still would be some human trying to push the envelope and try to discover something else. I would imagine.
I think the idea that you put forth in terms of pushing forward is the biggest thing that I see whenever I think of the people that are developing AI. For me personally, I think that the people that w- want to see AI go in a certain direction is more in implanting AI into robotics and then being able to have robots do the things that humans can't do, but can think like a human in a certain situation. So I'm going to bring it up again, surgery or some kind of like mining situation where you have to go into, uh, let's say, a dangerous situation and you need someone to think on the fly. That's where AI can be used, or you can use it to try to um, solve very complicated math situations to kind of solve a complicated issue that's pressing and that's needed for that particular time. These are the kind of things that I think that the people are developing AI for. And then there's all these little offshoots that you guys actually talked about that probably is being used right now. Like if you said YouTube, um, there's certain kind of business aspects to it, where you can figure out how AI can be used to target certain demographics to get certain people to buy a certain thing. Those are kind of like the secondary offshoots. But I think the people that are developing it, they're not thinking about the business aspects. They're kind of really thinking more about how can humankind push forward, like you said, Chris, and kind of make life a lot easier to live.
I love what you said, Joey, and it's because kind of, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you're kind of saying that AI has almost a human element to it. There's still human qualities, and you know why that is? It's because we created it. That's what I'm trying to tell you. AI is always going to mimic humans. It doesn't matter. It can be a robot, it can be a computer, it can be a phone. But you know who made the phone? You know who created the robot? A human. That's why it's always gonna it can't help itself but to blend.
All right, but what about when AI begins to create AI? Because that's the point.
That's a good point. That's what I said in the very beginning of this. We're gonna come full circle right now. Um, that's what I distrust. That's what scares me. The fact that AI can almost assimilate itself, and that's why, for anyone who watched Star Trek, that's the Borg. The Borg is what we're talking about right now. It, it's a collective mind that, what you said to your point, Chris, that actually can create itself. And that's, once that happens, we're done.
All right, I want to talk about the immortality thing again because that's always been something. I grew up watching Highlander, and there can be only one. So I've had immortality on the brain.
That's a great movie. Great movie.
Oh, the TV show is even better. You gotta watch the TV show. Adrian Paul, if you're out there, if you ever listen to this podcast, I respect you. Um, but yeah. So I guess what I'm curious about is see, AI is one thing, right? So like I think we've hit the varying aspects of AI as even as three lay people, right? I think we've articulated in a good way, some of the worries, a lot of the potential benefits. Now, I'm curious, right, with this idea of immortality, and a lot of people. It's always been as long as there's probably been humans on the planet. There's been someone who's no one has ever wanted to die. Right? Like there's always wasn't the philosopher's stone. The goal of that was in early alchemy was to try to find the immortality, a cure for death. A lot of religions as well. So what do you think the world would look like if we were able to safe state, we were able to prolong our existence. And you said something, Joe, and I forget exactly what you said, but it just stirred this thought in me. Like it was about, I remember, it was about Bezos and how he wants to not die, right? Lots of people don't want to die. But what if, like, you look at these CEOs that are very powerful, right? I would imagine Amazon in many ways is more powerful than many countries, right? And it's controlled not 100%, but in a big way. There's one mind kind of pointing the entity in a different direction. Now, what if that person, that entity, could live 1,000 years? What if? How would that work? I don't know. I haven't thought about this before, but you said something, Joe. It made me think about it. It was like, how would governments deal with that, right? Like, if technology came about that could prolong life, like nearly, we're talking about almost indefinitely at that point. If you're able to like just save your consciousness, this kind of is reflected in the TV show and the book Altered Carbon. Like, what if you could just keep putting your consciousness in new bodies, or a robot body, or a new biological body, right? And you could just live 1,000 years, or you could live 500 years. What would that world look like, right? What if Jeff Bezos was the only guy to have that technology? Like, how would the government deal with that? Like, I almost feel like you're talking about a technology that would change the game, right? AI, yes, but that's all right. To what you said, Joey, that let's say that is good, all good. Now imagine if a human being could live 1,000 years, like the amount of both positive and negative he could do, and how would governments control that? Right? What would that be like? With the American government, he's like, Jeff Bezos, got to give us this technology, because if you can live 1,000 years, that means you can outlive any political leader, anything. So what do you guys think about that specifically? Immortality.
So I can see not only this government, but several foreign governments just coming up with like an antitrust situation and just they just shut everything down. The question would then be, if it's really sentient, how do you shut down something that's kind of omnipresent? How do you do that? I don't know the answer to that question, but I feel like these are things that the titans of industry are just running amok with, and no one's coming up to these guys and saying, okay, why are you doing this? What are the ramifications if X, Y, and Z happen? Do you have a backup plan to this? It's just kind of odd to me. That's just to me, that's the worrying part. Like, how do the titans of industry actually wield such power with no repercussions at the moment?
Joe, I just want to add one clarifying remark. I wasn't talking about AI. I'm talking about like a human being, in essence, like the consciousness of Jeff Bezos continuing to live on long after he should be dead. Like, but it's still in essence Jeff Bezos. He's not this sentient robot. It's like Jeff Bezos. He can recall his memories. He still loves his children. This technology would theoretically be able to allow you to live, because you could save your consciousness and kind of just put it into a new body. I'm talking about that. Like, what do you think about that? Like immortality as like an individual, not as like a collective or a sentient robot. I'm talking about like Jeff Bezos living the 500 years.
And that's kind of what I was getting to. Because from what I understand with Bezos, him trying to cheat death, he would use AI to do like kind of like the movie Transcendence with Johnny Depp, where he would implant his consciousness into AI to then try to be completely prevalent in terms of continuing his work in technology and in trying to quote unquote improve lives. And that to me is the danger, because if you have one person with that kind of power, then things can go very, very wrong very quickly. Robbie, you had something you wanted to chime in with?
I got a question for both of you. And it's, did I write it down? Jesus, Murphy. The lawnmower. Fuck. All right, no, go back, Joe. I gotta remember the question I was asking.
So with kind of immortality, it's so it's a loaded like a loaded kind of ideology or a loaded way of thinking because the way I kind of see things, what's life worth living if there is no end? You wouldn't have any kind of um, any motivations to do anything because life is just everlasting. It's I don't know. I don't Me personally, I don't like that kind of thinking. The idea of mortality is scary, but the idea of immortality to me personally is even scarier because there's no purpose. You're just living aimlessly. And if you want to, the whole idea of living life is to live it fully with as little regret as possible. And there's very little of a chance of you doing that if you are living forever.
Um, all right. So my question is this to you then, Joseph. Um, would you want to live that long? I think that's more of a significant question than the actual fact that you could. Would you want to? And Chris, you can take this after Joe. Would you want to be able to live that long? Would you want to live 1,000 years and all that?
It depends on the scenario. If I was able to live that long with my body and not just be a consciousness somewhere, I would want to live longer than the average lifespan of a human being. I don't know about 1,000 years. I can't even begin to think of what 1,000 years on this planet would even be like, let alone me living that. So I would definitely want a longer lifespan, but it depends on the scenario. If I'm just a consciousness uploaded somewhere, then there's no part. I want no part of that. That to me is not really being a human. But if I were to find a way where you can put my consciousness in my same body, but somehow keep it going, or put my consciousness in another body, maybe 150 years, maybe 200. But yeah, I wouldn't want to be any longer than that.
Okay, yeah, that I like that you clarified that at the end. I would me same question. I would 100% be down to live longer, but same caveats that you said, Joe. Like I don't think. I mean, I can't even really wrap my head around what that would be like to live like let's say as like a disembodied consciousness. Like that's more like we're talking about. Like you start to go into the rabbit hole of like the singularity of like your consciousness and an AI kind of everything just becomes this kind of whirlwind of something, this technological whirlwind. But if I could live like in a body, and I don't even know if it would matter so much if it was like the body I was born into, but it was just a biological body, and my consciousness was able to like let's just say the technology existed where I could literally live to my consciousness in the same body, 100%. I don't think we Dude, I'm 34 years old. I figured out very little in life, right? I've mastered nothing, right? And we're lucky in the sense we got time. None of us have family. Like we're not raising children. We're not having to work to provide for people, and we still. I'll speak for myself, and I still don't think I have anything figured out or understand just myself. Just myself. Not forget the world, but myself. So to have the benefit and blessing of more time, I think I would 100% would do it. 100%. If I could live 200 years, just think about how many things you could learn and apply yourself to, how many things you're good at that you just, we live without time. So there's a limit to how much you can really do. And some people are highly productive. They'll have 3 careers. That's not the majority. So I think it'd be really fascinating. And the one thing because I grew up watching Highlander, the TV show, I, I I think about this question a lot. And the one thing you see play out in that show, and obviously it's fiction, but it's that you give someone 500 years, they might have started out as like a savage, but in 500 years time, because you'll see in the show, like they'll do flashbacks and so forth, that they've learned, they've grown, they've worked out of certain negative aspects of their personality, and then like flash forward 500 years, now they work in finance, right? So I think that's a it saddens me that we don't have a lot of time. And I don't like I hear what you're saying about you need to take advantage of all the time you have and like live in the moment and whatnot, but that's a luxury that like I want to say, and I'm generalizing, 90% of people don't have because they don't have the blessing of time, right? They imagine if you have a family of 5 and you have to take care of them. How much time do you have to really think about yourself and to try to grow as a person and see what your potential is? Like, no, like your situation is laid out in a way, and yes, by choices you made, but a lot of times it's just the situation that you're not like you're on cruise control. You're just living for the moment. Just try to like, I got to do this. I got to get that job. I got to get that money. I got to take care of this kid. I got to do this. Got to do it. Oh, this kid's sick. I got to now take care of this person. Like I think to have time would be amazing. But, and this is my question to both of you, is that 2 things. One, what would the world look like if the populations didn't die, right? Like that's a whole different ball game. It's like, let's say people could live a long time. What would that landscape look like? Because that means wars are going to be different. How we engage with the environment would have to be different because you'd be around a lot longer. What would the population look like? You can't be having tons of kids if every child lives 1,000 years. The world would be very different. So that's my one question. And my second question is,
Hold on. I gotta interrupt you. I love that the first thing you go to is military. It's hilarious.
oh yeah, I mean, dude,
But go ahead.
imagine, right? Like if people lived long times, one could say that there would be a lot of wars. Another could say that people would have to figure out how to live together because they're just going to be around a long time. So that's I'm curious for both you say. And the second question is, what do you think about people and their mindsets? Do you think, like I feel that if I could live a longer, I would be able to do more and learn more. Do you think that's something that would happen for most people? Or like what you said earlier with AI, Joe, would it be that people are just like twiddling their thumbs and watching TV, but instead of doing it for 30 years, they do it for 3,000 years?
So to answer your first question, I think that 90% of the population would not have access to immortality. I think, and this is just my kind of frame of viewing things as it is now. I feel like the top 1% or the top, maybe if I'm being very generous, the top 10% would have access to something like this if it were to play out. And I think that's kind of another negative aspect of this, because you can't have we have 7-8 billion people on this planet. You can't have 8 billion of the inhabitants of planet Earth living for 200, 300, 400 years, because we have finite resources here as it is. And then you're probably going to pile on another billion or 2 billion when people procreate. So there's going to be a mass run on resources if that were to happen. I think the people that kind of invented this, I think they know it, and it's just really more of a selfish kind of I want to live forever kind of deal, and I'm not really worried about the rest of the population. Go ahead, Rob.
I I see what you're saying, but why would you care about that? If you can live for 600, 700, 1,000 years, why would you care about the environment? Like I'm not saying, Joe, this is not an accusatory question. I'm just saying, like, just intellectually, why would you care about that? If, oh, I can live 800 years, I don't give a fuck what happens. What makes you care?
I think if you were to live that long, and especially if somehow, some way, you were able to plant your consciousness in a living, breathing body, you want to be able to, one, be able to enjoy the beauty of the world that you live in, and two, kind of be able to not die in a hellscape where there's very little oxygen or no sunlight or very little sunlight. Those kinds of things that would come into play if the environment were to be like kind of fucked over by billions of people that had no no regard for how we lived. And to answer your second question, Chris, I think easily people would take their life for granted. I can say that with 99% conviction that if people thought they would be able to live for 200, 300, 400 years, that they would take their life for granted and they would waste decades doing something that most people wouldn't even think about doing.
So while we're on the subject of immortality, so I have another question for you guys. Do you think that if you could live a long time, right, let's just put a number on it, 500 years, do you think that people would be more ready for death or ever more afraid of death because they've had more to live, had more life, right? It's an interesting, like, this is kind of like a question that's a piggyback off something you said earlier, Joe, is that um, there's something positive you were saying about the fact that you're going to die, right? Like there's an end. And I mean, if you're of the mind, like you gotta make the best out of it. You gotta do some stuff because shit, you don't get a second chance. It's one and done. And with if that wasn't true, and you could live a long time, do you think people would be more prepared if there was an end? Let's just say the lifespan is 500, and that's the end. Would people, when they got close to that, be like, "Oh yeah, I'm ready to go. I've had a good run," or do you think humans, would even want more? What do you guys think about that?
I personally don't think that humans would be prepared for death, no matter the length of time that they live. It's to me, the idea of, it depends on how you view death and the afterlife, but I don't think, if you are a religious person or not, I still don't think that most people are prepared for death and what that might bring. So whether you live to be 50 or 70 or 500 years, no one, I don't think anyone can be prepared for what they think that the life after death could possibly be.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Joe. I think um, it's shitty to say this, but I think we're all naturally selfish, and we're constantly only think, even family aside, girlfriends aside, wives, boyfriends, friends, we're naturally selfish, and that's just human nature. So I think Joe's right. It's like, I mean, it's greedy to say that, but I think we just want to live personally as long as we want to, and it doesn't matter. The repercussions don't matter. Age, health, circumstance, it doesn't matter. We're just naturally built that way, and we're wired to want to be that way.
So, with all the subjects that we've talked about today, right? We've talked about the Neuralink briefly. We talked about like this idea of humans and kind of that slow progression towards kind of a merger, let's say. And we've talked about AI, mortality. What is something? And we're three different people. We take three different stances on a lot of these. Sometimes our views kind of interconnect, and sometimes they're vastly different. What when you look to the future, right? So we're all in our mid-30s, let's say. I think we're all in our mid-30s. When you look, let's say, 30 years into the future, we're in our 60s. Insane. What is something you look forward to and actually want to see happen? whether it's a technological, and let's say to keep within the tone of this episode, in the technological realm, because that's where we're probably going to see innovation and change. I don't think, in the spiritual, in the religious world and in these different areas, I don't know if we're going to see something really new take place. But what is something you look forward to seeing, or you hope to see 30 years from now, 40 years from now, in your lifetime?
Maybe it's recency bias, but I feel like there's two things. One, being able to kind of overcome disease. I feel like when nature always throws a kind of stone to kind of shake things up in terms of how we live our lives. I think I don't know if this is kind of like a negative way of thinking, but I kind of think it's a little bit of population control. But I feel like when it comes to technology, it would be a nice way to, if something were like a disease or a pandemic were to occur, it would be nice that we can actually overcome that in a such a short time frame where we can actually just go about living the rest of our lives and not have to worry about the stresses of dealing with such a pandemic, uh, socially and medically. And then the second part would be kind of the other part that Bezos and Musk are kind of dealing with, which is kind of interstellar travel. If we kind of ruin the kind of way of life on this planet, it would be nice to kind of come up with a backup plan to try to move the human species, and not even on only the human species, but also all species that live on this planet onto another one, so that we can continue living it. And that's kind of the other part that I kind of want to see. Is there another planet out there that we can inhabit? Is there another group of species that we can actually interact with and learn from? Those are the two things that I kind of look at.
Yeah, I like that, Joe. I like that a lot. I and it's gonna sound corny when I say this, but I want everyone to just appreciate existence. This is a gift. We're allowed to think, see, feel, move, and I'm gonna sound like Albert Camus here, but there's nothing better than an absurd reality, and that's where we're kind of living in it right now. But let's everyone appreciate each other and not try to judge or discriminate against everyone. That's what I want. That's what I want to see. I want to see everyone appreciate what it means to live in the modern world.
Yeah, those are both great answers. Rob, you're going into that spiritual, philosophical realm, which I like. Um,
Oh,
and
oh yeah, Matthew McConaughey style.
and it's interesting. You're right, because what we're talking about is very. There's so much crossover, right? Because everything affects something else, right? So it's like a technological innovation, especially the stuff we're talking about. That the bleed over is going to be great, right? It's like that affects how you view the environment, how you view religion, how you view philosophy, how you view the interconnectedness between species, right? Um, that's the how we treat animals, how animals, you know, that to me with the AI talk is interesting because it's like when you talk about like a super intelligence, it's one thing to be worried about is if it looks at how we interact with lesser beings on our planet, and lesser beings mean not as intelligent as us. I don't believe an ant is as intelligent as a human being, nor do I believe a human being, that a dog is more intelligent than a human. So how we treat these creatures on our planet, it's kind of scary because if a super intelligence says, "Oh, well, I'm trying to learn how to interconnect and how to relate to other species," well, human beings are eating all of these other lesser species. That must mean that whoever's the top of the food chain kind of names the game, right? They're the one that sets the rules, and that's kind of a scary thought. But to answer the question that I asked both of you, I agree with both of you. Like, I think it'd be amazing, medicine, right? It's cancer. To be able to find a way to just get rid of that, like, it would be forget about living forever. It would be amazing if every human being on the planet could just live a disease-free life. You're still going to die, let's say. You're still going to have the same lifespan, but you don't have to worry about deteriorating. You don't have to worry about, multiple sclerosis. You don't have to worry about, different, dementia and these things that pain people as they die. It's a shame and an indecency that someone has to grow weak and come to the end and might not even remember their children. Something about that just seems insane, right? It's horrible that someone will live and do all these things in their life and then come to an end where they're like a child again. So to be able to, that would be a great thing to see in our lifetime, right? 35 years, that the next 35 years, that people don't die of those sorts of things, and they can end their life in a more positive way, pain-free way, kind of go out on their feet, as the expression goes. So that to me would be kind of amazing. Interstellar travel, Joe, would be awesome to see. I don't know if it interests me so much, but if there's some aliens out there and you get the chance to maybe discover them, that'd be amazing. And what's interesting is that, think about it, immortality or extended lifespans is the gateway towards, in my opinion, space travel, right? Because all those places are far away, but what if you could live a long, long time or constantly reboot yourself in a new biological body? I mean, that's like the ancient explorers, right? They left home, and who knows how many years until they came back. So if you could live a long time, it would be like Interstellar, right? You could go far, far, far into the universe, and who knows what what you would discover. So it's we've been talking for almost an hour and 40. Any final thoughts on this subject? I really enjoyed hearing what you guys had to say, because you guys all have unique takes on these hot button subjects.
For me, I kind of
Go ahead, Joe.
oh sorry, I kind of look at history and see when new technological advances come through, and see what the public kind of thinks of these advances. It's usually like kind of a worst case scenario kind of reaction, and usually it's anything but, or it's somewhere in the middle. And I kind of feel with AI, it's very much going to be the same way. It to me, it's all about who is teaching the AI to learn, because I think it's very much like teaching a kid. If you set certain patterns for AI to actually um, see the world in a negative light, then yeah, we have some problems. But I feel like the people who are trying to push this technology, they're trying to make the world a better place, and I just don't see how a Terminator 2 scenario or Ultron scenario would come into place where AI would think that the best way of saving humanity is to get rid of it. I just don't see that.
All right, Rob, you're up.
Wait. Ultron, was that a comic book reference? Oh, I need Joe's reaction to that. Damn it.
I was laughing pretty hard. I couldn't help it.
Yeah, but honestly, this is, people are to be fucking blown away by this, but I think Joe's exactly right. This is the thing about this whole thing is, yes, it's beneficial in some ways. It makes things more convenient, but I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know. I think it is Terminator 2. I think we're going to Judgment Day, and we're gonna need Linda Hamilton. We're gonna need Schwarzenegger. We're, we're gonna need Robert Patrick, my boy. Best villain, best movie villain. We should talk about this too, Joe. Best movie villain is Robert Patrick, hands down. But, um, yeah, it's a tough situation, but I think the last thing I want to say is the three of us, we've lived on both sides, which is what I was trying to say earlier. And it gives you a really good perspective on what's happening where you live, because the three of us have lived in an era where there were no cell phones. They just didn't exist. And we also live now in the iPhone 12 era. So it gives us a good perspective, and Robert Patrick is the best movie villain of all time.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us for this episode. This was an interesting talk because I think this is a subject that will affect us in our lifetime. Like, there is no doubt. What shape it takes, we're all going to find out together. So it was interesting to hear all of your takes, and I'm hoping the positive. I'm hoping that, Joseph, all of your positive thinking goes out into the universe and finds its way into all of the minds of all of those who are building something that will affect us, and hopefully affect us in a really, really positive way.